Welcome to Gulf Chats, where stories of the Gulf come alive. From daring voyages to the dynamic history that shaped our coastal world, we bring you first-hand accounts, expert insights, and the timeless tales of sailors, explorers, and maritime pioneers. Welcome aboard.
I'm the Coastal Outreach Manager for Alabama Audubon. I started this position back in 2002, but for the previous 10 years to that, I have spent time working in the Florida Keys, Charleston, South Carolina, Alaska, the Eastern Shore of Virginia, all working on marine science education, outreach, and conservation. And even though I was born and raised in the great state of Nebraska, my passion is sharing about coastal conservation, and so I'm excited to share a little bit of that with you all today. So Alabama Audubon's mission is to promote conservation and a greater knowledge of birds, their habitat, and the natural world. Our main office is located up in Birmingham, and up until 2019, we were known as Birmingham Audubon, which some of you may be familiar with. In 2019, we changed our name to Alabama Audubon to better encompass the statewide work that we are doing. It is in fact statewide because not only do we have offices up in Birmingham, we also have an office in the Black Belt region in Greensboro, and then we have an office down here on the coast. So we are increasing our statewide presence. Our coastal program began in earnest in 2017, and our specific mission here is to monitor, protect, and educate about the threatened beach nesting birds that we have here in Alabama. So my goal today is to help build a better picture for you all about the unique lifestyle of these birds that not a lot of people know about, and why there is a need for us to be doing the work that we do. So what is a beach nesting bird? Or actually, by a show of hands, how many people in here who have heard of beach nesting birds before? All right, that's a better average than what I normally get. So like the name indicates, these are birds that will lay their eggs on the beach. It is not in the safety of a tree or a bush where it's up off the ground away from some threats. It is completely vulnerable to a large group of threats that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Of course, these birds' nesting season is March through August, when everybody else wants to also be at our beach, and that has a lot to do with it as well. These eggs will remain on top of the sand for 26 to 31 days, depending on the species, vulnerable to a lot of those nests. And when I'm giving presentations, I like to play a little game of I Spy with folks. So if y'all will humor me, we're gonna go through some pictures here to show you just how difficult it would be to spot these if you were on the beach. So by show of hands, who can see the eggs in this picture? This is the easy level, y'all. The eggs in this picture are right here. All right? All right, level 2. It's a little bit more difficult because this projector screen's a little bit small and y'all are all the way back there, but it's a good look at, what it would be like if you were out on the beach. Can anybody see the egg in this picture? Just one. The egg in this picture is right there. This is a picture I took on the very first survey that I did with Alabama Audubon, and I was following in the literal footsteps of our coastal biologist, and I have never been so scared to walk through the sand in my entire life, because when I saw that first egg, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like landmines around here with a high risk of stepping on something. All right, what about this picture? This is from one of our colonies on Dauphin Island, and there are actually 4 nests in this picture. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then this is the expert level picture, and I love this picture because it was the very first snowy plover nest that I found all on my own on Dauphin Island. Can anybody find the eggs in this picture? The eggs are located right there. And then, just for fun, I like to throw in this picture. I took this picture and I have it on my phone, and whenever I'm going through clearing out pictures, I always stop and I'm like, why did I take this picture? There had to have been a reason. And so I play I Spy for probably about 5 minutes, zooming in through this picture, because I know that there's a nest in there. I know I took it for a reason. And honestly, looking up here at this picture, you can't tell, but when you zoom in, that is what those eggs and that nest look like. So very, very difficult to see. So now that we've talked a little bit about the unique nature of their nesting, I want to show you the product of the nesting. So let me introduce you to the baby birds that are on Alabama's beaches. These are some of my favorite pictures, and I know I am biased, but our beach nesting birds are some of the cutest baby birds that we have. This right here is what we are working to protect, and whether you know it or not, whether you see them or not, they're out on our beaches every March through September. So I want to, at this point, kind of throw in a little bit of the technical science and introduce you to a couple of terms that are going to be important. So we have two different nesting strategies when it comes to birds. We have altricial birds, and those are the birds that you typically have in your backyard. They're going to nest in a tree, nest in a bush. When they hatch out, they're pretty much helpless. They don't really have feathers, their eyes are closed, they're completely dependent upon the parents until they jump the nest and they fledge. So that's altricial. Our beach nesting birds are what we call precocial. And precocial means that within 24 hours after these birds hatch from their nests, they are actually up running around on the beach. So these birds are born with their little down feathers, and like I said, they will dry off and they are up and they are running around, and that's basically because the threats that they face are so numerous that it requires them to be able to get up and move on the beach to be able to defend themselves.
Excuse me, are you going to tell us how big the eggs are?
Yes.
Okay.
I forgot, I have a fake example in my truck and I forgot to bring that in. But for most of our birds, well, it's going to vary based on the species, but our least terns, so these birds are snowy plovers, their eggs are going to be about the size of a quail egg, if you know what a quail egg is, like you see in the grocery store.
What size a bluebird egg is?
It's going to be like a little bit bigger than a bluebird egg, so they are very, very small. The bigger the bird, the bigger the size of the egg is going to be. So for birds like our American oyster catcher, if you can imagine like a size up from a ping pong ball, so that's going to be the size. And then when you get into our larger beach nesting birds, like our Caspian and our royal terns, which are really large tern species, you're talking like the size of a chicken egg and maybe a little bit bigger. So it varies different on the species. That's a great question. So I'm going to go ahead and I wanted to introduce you to a little bit better some of the species of birds that we have on our beach. We do have 13 species of birds total that will nest on our beaches here in Alabama. We have 6 species that are considered our species of conservation concern, which means that their population numbers and their reproductive success is so low that they are at risk of serious population decline within our state and potentially no longer nesting in our state at all. So we're going to start with a bird that is called the least tern. These are going to be some of our colonial nesters, and our colonial nesters are birds that they're going to nest together in groups, and then we also have solitary nesters by themselves. The advantages of nesting together in a group is going to be the protection of your numbers, right? There's safety in numbers. But the disadvantage to that is that if something comes or happens to that nesting site, whether it's a predator or overwash or something like that, you, humor me if you will, have all your eggs in one basket, right? So you're at greater risk of losing more nests all at once when you're talking about your colonial nesters. Our least tern is called a least tern because it is the smallest of our tern species. You can identify it by its relatively small size, its call, that black cap that it has on it with a little white forehead, and that signature yellow bill. The least tern is going to be our only tern species in this state that has that yellow bill. These are just two of my favorite pictures that I like to throw in here. I could not believe when our coastal biologist sent us this picture. That is probably an hours old to days old least tern chick that is seeking shelter in the cup of an oyster shell. So you can see just how camouflaged they are and just how tiny they are. One of my favorite things about watching a least tern colony, and this may make me a bird nerd, but I could sit and watch a least tern colony for hours. And you'll sit there and you'll be watching adults and you'll see the adults kind of shuffling on top of the sand, and then they'll go to stand up, and I don't know if y'all can see, but that's a least tern chick sitting underneath the adult right there. So all of a sudden you'll just see like one little baby or two little babies pop out. And the reason they do this is not necessarily to keep these baby birds warm, because down here in July, we don't really need to worry about staying warm. These adult birds will stand over the chicks in order to actually help keep them cool. It helps to provide them shade while out on the beach. And least terns will actually go, the adults will fly into the water and they will dip their chest into the water, and then they will go back and lay on top of the chicks to help cool them off with that water, which I think is pretty interesting. With our least terns, just to kind of give a broader perspective of the threats that these birds face, we can talk a little bit of like a tale of two counties. Most of our beach nesting birds tend to come back and nest in the same area, and least terns do the same to some extent. But in my time here, I have watched our least tern species be the bird that kind of exemplifies, if you build it, they will come. And what I mean by that is that when these birds are provided the correct habitat, the correct substrate, they like to nest in what we call shell hash, so it's like mashed up seashells with that sand in there. When they can find that habitat, they will show up to nest. One really great example of this is the Graveline Bay Restoration Project that's going on over on Dauphin Island, which is all of these small sand islands that you see right there. Now, the Graveline Bay Restoration Project was initiated because their plan is to eventually turn that section back into a marsh to help buffer that area from wave energy and storm surge and stuff like that. But when they first finished those islands, it was just sand islands, and those least terns took to it like a magnet. We had, I think, close to 400 least tern nests out there at one point. It was pretty interesting to see. That project kind of wrapped up about 2 years ago. So over the past 2 years, we have watched them do more plantings, because that was the point of this project, to turn it into a marsh. And so as they've done those plantings and the grass has expanded, it's kind of taken away from the available suitable habitat for these birds. So they have that going against them. But not only that, but some of the bigger birds, like our royal terns and the black skimmers, have found out that that's desirable property for them too. And so when they show up, our least terns kind of get pushed to the side. So now, in the past 2 years, where our least terns have been nesting, has anybody here driven to Dauphin Island in the last 10 months? When you guys are going down the causeway, if you look on the east side, you see where they're doing all that construction out there, building those jetties. So as they're building those jetties, they're kind of piling up those dredge spoils, and that is where our least terns have decided that they're going to nest last year and this year, which is making our lives a little bit difficult to try and be able to monitor them, but other people can't get there because it is an active construction site and it is not easily accessible by predators. And so those least terns are actually having pretty good success there as of right now. Now we're going to jump over to Mobile County, which I don't know if you can tell by the presence of all the houses, about where we're at. So this picture right here shows right at Perdido Pass, which is right here. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Baldwin County, sorry. We're over in Baldwin County, and out at Alabama Point, which is right there, has historically been one of our largest least tern colonies in the state. And that is right smack dab in what I would argue is probably one of the most popular beach destinations on the Alabama coastline. So not only are they up against a pretty high human presence, there's also a couple resident great blue herons that are being fed by people there, so they stick around. Great blue herons will definitely eat a least tern chick if they can catch them. We also have crows and gulls and mammalian predators that come in there. So while we have the largest numbers of birds there, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're having the largest success. So for the past couple years at that specific site, we have had an average of 250 nests, okay? A full clutch of least tern, like for one nest, is 3 eggs. So 250 times 3, we're looking at over 700 chicks, the potential for. Of 700 eggs, we have had less than 20 birds fledge. And when I say fledge, that means that that little bird is capable of flight. And once it's capable of flight, we mark it as a success because its survivability rate increases dramatically after that point. For 2004, all across all of our sites where least terns nest in the state of Alabama, we had 807 nests, which translates to 2,421 eggs on the ground. Of those, we had 206 chicks that we observed. Of those chicks, we had only 139 of them fledge. I'm not great at mental math, but those aren't great percentages. So in Orange Beach especially, this is a picture of another site. If you scroll through Google Maps, you can see just how built up our coastline is, and there's very, very few spots left where these birds have the potential to nest. This right here is another one of the nesting sites, and if any of you are familiar with the Phoenix condos down there, so it's right in between two very large condo units. This is a zoomed in picture, but it's not just like open suitable habitat, there's people's houses in there. And even though we have birds nesting there, because people own that property, because it is their private property, half of the people that own those property there say that we cannot go on to their property to help these birds. So we can stand from the beach and we can watch and we can count and do our best, but sometimes there's nothing that we can do to try and help protect them. One last little note on our lease terns. Like I said, I'm going into my 4th nesting season here, which seems like a lot and not very much all at once, but just in the 4 years that I have been here, I have seen 3 historical lease tern nesting sites that have been developed. That means for like 5, 10, 15 years, we had birds coming back to those areas to nest. And if there are birds on the ground, these birds are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which means that if there are birds nesting there, you can't develop it, you can't touch, you can't harass. The moment those birds leave from the season, and they do around September, October, because they're migratory, it's fair game. Once those birds disappear, they develop that property and the birds come back and that habitat is no longer there. So that's kind of what we are watching happen. And you know, throughout college and my early career, I hear a lot about habitat loss. I feel like that term is thrown around a lot, but actually watching that happen firsthand really hits different and has brought kind of a different meaning to it for me.
So 1 clutch of eggs per year?
No, that's another great question. So these birds will re-nest. So if a lease tern nests and the nest gets depredated, if it's early enough in the season, they will re-nest and they will try again. Some birds will try 2 or 3 times if they keep losing their nests. But if we get to like late July and they still haven't been successful, some of the birds will basically be like, oh, the season's over, I'm done, I gave it my best shot, better luck next year. But if a bird raises a successful clutch early in the year, if there's enough time, it might try and raise a second one, but normally it will just dedicate its energy to like raising those little baby birds. I know that you aren't supposed to play favorites, but of all the birds that we work with, the black skimmer is my favorite. I lovingly refer to it as the Alabama toucan with that big funky bill that it has on the front of its face there. I think it's pretty easily identifiable. It is another one of our colonial nesters, and it nests almost entirely on Dauphin Island and the surrounding islands over there. They do tend to have a little bit better success, and I don't know if that has to do with their bigger size or that they pick areas to nest in that are not as easily accessible to predators, but they still don't have great success. So in 2024, we had 245 nests. Of that, we produced 90 chicks and we had 60 fledglings. So kind of better numbers, but still not great. That's still not the numbers that you want to see. A lot of the black skimmers that we do lose, like I said, they are colonial nesters, and so they are lost largely due to overwash. And throughout the history of our program, we have seen multiple times where if we get like a really strong storm that rolls through, we have lost colonies of 80 nests. We have lost colonies of 130 nests. We have lost colonies of almost 200 nests overnight in one event just like that. So they're super vulnerable to that overwash. Transitioning over to our solitary nesters. So the advantage of being a solitary nester is that you are more easily hidden. You can kind of tuck away back somewhere and you don't draw a lot of attention to yourself. But the disadvantage to that is that you are the only thing protecting your nest, right? You don't have those numbers around you. Our American oyster catchers are a larger shorebird with some pretty distinct colors. I think they kind of remind me of like a penguin that has a carrot for a bill. I don't know why, that's just kind of what comes to mind. And of all the chicks that we work with, the baby oyster catchers, they remind me of dinosaurs. Like, especially when you see them walk, like they run like a baby velociraptor. Like, you remember who their ancestors are. And yes, oyster catchers do in fact dine on oysters. They use that very large, slim bill when the oysters are open and feeding. They will stick their bill in there and they will cut the muscle that like allows an oyster to retract, and then they will dine on oysters. So I would say they have the most expensive taste of all of our birds. We can find these birds on the islands surrounding Dauphin Island, and to my knowledge, we do not have any oyster catchers that are nesting over in Baldwin County. That is because they are much more shy, they spook a lot easier, and they tend to like more like marshier, secluded areas. In 2024, we had 11 American oyster catcher nests that we found. These guys are a little bit more difficult because, like I said, they nest in the marsh, and these birds can disappear into the marsh very easily. But we had 11 nests, so roughly that could translate to 33 eggs. We had 7 chicks, and only 2 of those birds made it to fledgling. And it is worth noting that of all of the birds that we have that we work with here in Alabama, we do have the lowest population of American oyster catchers. On average, we only have like 9 to 11 breeding pairs of oyster catchers within our state, which is a really small number. Next, we're going to hop over to the Wilson's plover. And I know we do have some birders in the room, and a Wilson's plover is a treat for any birder to see in the state of Alabama. That is kind of how uncommon they have become. They're a darker tan brown bird with a little bit of a broader bill. They do have that broader bill than the snowy plover because their favorite prey item is fiddler crabs. And so they need something to be able to crunch through those little fiddler crab shells. Since they like fiddler crabs, you do tend to find them in like siltier, muddier areas like the marshes. We only have a few thousand Wilson's plovers left globally. Thousands left globally. And the Gulf Coast is a critical breeding habitat for these birds. In 2022, we found the first Wilson's plover nest in the state since 2017. So we had gone that long without having a Wilson's plover nest in the state. That nest was depredated by a coyote within 48 hours. Last year, we had a pair of snowy plovers show up at a different site, and it was a site that we didn't expect to see them at, and they were kind of checking everything out. They were showing like nesting behaviors. We never found a nest, and they took off mid-season without any young birds in tow, so we don't think they actually nested. And then this year, I got a surprising text from one of my coworkers with a picture of a Wilson's plover nest back at that same site. This nest has survived for 3 weeks, which means that in the next 10 days, it is set to hatch. So we are all holding our breath, like having a hatched Wilson's plover nest would be a really, really big deal for our program and for the state. And can anybody find the nest in this picture? So Wilson's plovers, like a lot of those pictures I showed you were out on the open beach. Wilson's plovers make it much more difficult because they like to nest, actually with the shadows you can hardly see. They like to nest, it's right in there, in the middle of grass clumps. So they make it extra hard on you to find. And I don't know if y'all can see, but I think it was Monday was our full moon for the month, which means that we have our highest tides during that time. And the tide, you can see the rack line, the water came up and wrapped around that nest. So it must have been just slightly high enough to keep it out of the reach of the water. So we're thinking that this hopefully might be the lucky one.
And this is on Dauphin Island?
This is on Dauphin Island, yes. Just like I said with the lease turns, kind of with the if you build it, they will come. That first nest that we found a couple years ago was out at Lightning Point in Bayou La Batterie, which is a restoration area. And the location where this nest currently is also a restoration area. So by collecting this data and doing this monitoring, like we are seeing that by doing this conservation in these restoration projects, like it does make an impact for these birds, and there is potential for these birds, if these sites are correctly managed, to have these bird populations come back.
What's the restoration project exactly? It's obvious, but I'm sure people don't.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I say restoration project, I'm talking about projects that are developed and carried out with the environment in mind. So they are doing these projects in order to restore something in particular, so a salt marsh or a mud flat. They're trying to restore an area to a habitat that it was before, since it's been lost to various reasons, whether that's erosion or sea level rise and stuff like that. That's a great question, though.
Is it to offset construction somewhere else?
I don't know that these specific sites in Alabama were doing that, but I do know that there are some areas like wetland restoration. Like if you build somewhere, that money has to go towards restoring wetlands in other areas. But I don't think these ones in particular were. I could be wrong. I know Lightning Point, that project was conducted by the Nature Conservancy, so you could probably go check that out on their website. I saw an article recently that referred to birds that nest on the coastline as the canaries of the coastline, and I really loved that phrase. We all know the canary in the coal mine, but a lot of our coastal birds are the canary of the coastline because they're telling us a story of the impacts of what is currently happening on our coast. And I think that it's a perfect story for all of the birds that we have nesting on our coast, but especially with the Wilson's plover, because the Wilson's plover are an example of if we are losing their habitat and not doing anything about it, these birds will eventually disappear. And if no work is done to protect these other birds, that is the direction that we could be heading in. So this bird has told us the story of what could happen, and so we're trying to take steps to not let that happen to our other birds. The last bird that I'm going to talk to you all about today is the snowy plover. And the snowy plover has kind of become the champion or the mascot of our coastal program, and honestly, I think we just picked it because its chicks are so freaking cute. Like I said, these chicks, when they hatch out, if you were to stack 2 cotton balls on top of each other and then put it on toothpicks, that's the size of these birds out there wandering the beach, which is very, very tiny. Snowy plovers admittedly fall into the they all look alike category of shorebirds, but like I said, the bill can tell you a lot about shorebirds. Our snowy plovers have a really short bill. They're going to be like a light gray on top and a white chest and belly. But when you're on the beach and you're looking at birds, our snowy plovers will typically have what I like to call the Frida Kahlo unibrow. You guys can see it right there. So if you see the unibrow and you see that black collar, it's a good chance that it's going to be a snowy plover. You're most likely to find our snowy plovers nesting on Dauphin Island or at the Fort Morgan Bon Secours National Wildlife Refuge area. They will tolerate people being around, but they definitely stay away from places like Gulf Shores and Orange Beach. That's just too busy for them. Snowy plovers made me fall in love with this job. When I started this job, I was a casual birder, if there is such a thing. But got more and more into it, and seeing these little baby birds running around on the beaches, it sold me, and I was all in. They are charismatic, they are smart, they're really good parents. They're hard to track, which is kind of the fun of it as well. And on top of it, they're just really stinking cute.
What do they eat?
Snowy plovers eat macro inverts. So we have tiger beetles that are out on our beaches. That's their favorite prey item. But any small insects that you see crawling around on the beach, that's what they're going to go after. And they'll also kind of sieve into the sand to get other little crustaceans and stuff. These pictures right here, I just like to include. They're 2 of my favorite pictures that we have. This right here just shows again how camouflaged our little snowy plovers can be. And this is a great picture depicting this little chick right here that has hatched. Is probably a couple hours old, while this one is still wet, is probably under an hour old. That bird just hatched out of its egg. I was asked a couple months ago in an interview if I had hope for these birds. And the answer immediately was yes, because I see how tirelessly not only my coworkers, but also a lot of other environmental organizations down here are working to help protect the unique nature of our coast. Also, with our snowy plovers, we have been having steadily more success and trending in the right direction, which makes us all really excited. So I want to talk a little bit about snowy plover numbers here really quickly. These numbers that you see right here That's not for just 2024. That is from 2017 to 2023. We fledged 10 snowy plovers in 6 years, just 10. Last year was a record year for our program. We fledged 7, which is more than we had, almost more than we had for those entire years. And I want to introduce you really quickly to some really special birds that came out of last year's nesting season. So this is what a little baby snowy plover looks like, hours old. And if you will notice on its leg, it has some little bracelets, what I jokingly say, on it. And you can kind of tell in some of our other pictures of our snowies that they have them as well. These are snowy plover bands. And we band a bird, we put these different unique bands on their legs so that we can keep track of individual birds, because without them, they all look the same. So thanks to banding of our snowy plovers, we know that these 2 chicks, we call them Book and BGYB, that's their band code combinations. They hatched last year, they fledged, we saw them flying, they were successful baby birds. They hung around with their parents for like a couple weeks, and then they disappeared in like November, which makes our hearts sink because, I mean, they're birds, they fly, they go to other places, we know that, but it always leaves us wondering like what happens to our birds, like do they survive? And these birds didn't show back up in December, January, February, well, last week in February, Book, blue, orange, orange, black, shows back up on the west end of Dauphin Island, and we were so elated. 2 weeks later, BGYB also showed back up on the west end of Dauphin Island. So these birds came back to their like natal nesting site for the nesting season. So we're excited, these birds are here. And then we had Book, blue, orange, orange, black, had a nest on the middle beach of Dauphin Island. It made it, I think, between 2 and 3 weeks before it was depredated, which is unfortunate, but there's enough time and we're hoping that he and his mate will re-nest. And then BGYB, which is the other chick, actually has a nest that is set to hatch today. So we have a biologist out there to go check out the nest today. I will be back out there with her tomorrow and back out there with her Friday. When we know we're nearing a nest date with our snowy plovers, we try and check it to hopefully catch those birds hatching so that we are able to band them. If we ban them, we could potentially have a 3rd generation of snowy plovers that we know for sure came from the west end of Dauphin Island, which is really exciting for us.
Did they tell you where they went?
They don't. They aren't the ones that you can like track. We call them backpacks where you can like actually track them. I think that those are too heavy for snowy plovers, though. I could be wrong. That would be really cool to be able to like live track them, right? So why are the populations of these birds declining? Like, why are the numbers so low that I've been talking about throughout this presentation? On one side of our coastline, we have the obvious, development. We are losing suitable nesting habitat for these birds. On the other side of our beach, we have the water. When we get high tides or storm surges, which is creating what we call the coastal squeeze. And so we are squeezing these birds into a smaller and smaller space that they have available to nest. And then we add on the fact that they nest during the summer, so we have all sorts of people out there who are also vying for beach space. And on top of that, we have a ton of different predators that can also get these birds. And so it's easy to kind of understand like why their numbers and their reproductive success is so low. We do get a lot of questions about like what happened. How do we know what happened to our birds? Like, how do we go to our report and say, well, this bird was lost from overwash or this bird was lost from depredation? And it is kind of like reading the context clues to solve any mystery. If we go to a nesting site one day and we see 5 least-turn nests, and we go back 3 days later and we see raccoon tracks walking up to each nest, no, we didn't have a game camera, no, I didn't see it happen, but it's pretty obvious like as to what happened. So a lot of times it's us doing a little bit of an investigation and reading the clues so that we know what's happening to our birds. What does Alabama Audubon do to help with all of this? Like I've kind of laid out, we do spend a lot of time, the majority of our summer out here looking for those birds. When the nesting season starts, we spend time scouring all of our beachfront trying to figure out where our birds are going to nest. Once they start exhibiting nesting behavior, they act a little bit different when they have eggs or chicks versus when they don't. Then we start looking for scrapes. So a scrape is the actual bowl in the sand that the birds lay their nests in, and that is this right here. You want to talk about finding a needle in a haystack? Picture yourself out on Dauphin Island Beach that has 8 miles and you're trying to find one of those. Which means that the way that we find them is we look for the birds, And then we spend a lot of time, I don't know if it's clear on here, but you can see all these little tracks in the sand, and those are snowy plover tracks. If you would have told college Courtney that she's gonna spend the amount of time that I do following itty bitty bird tracks on the beach, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are, and I really do enjoy it. Once we find the nest, we don't just leave them there and like hope for the best. We do have signs that we put out at all of our nesting areas that look like this. So if you see these, which if you go to the beach during the summer, there is a good chance that you will see these nests on the beach. That means that we do have an active nest or chicks in the area and to not go into those nesting areas. That's not all the Alabama Audubon does. In the summer, so starting on Memorial Day weekend, we have an awesome crew of volunteers that I affectionately call our bird bouncers. And so these people go out and we set up near the nesting areas, and it is our job to keep people from harassing those birds. So we keep people away from the nesting areas, or if people enter them, which they do despite all the signage, we kindly ask them to please exit the colony and do a little bit of education about why we're asking them to do that. We do a lot of education efforts. We do school programs, summer camps, tabling at local events, and one of the favorite parts of my job that I can't believe I get to call work is I get to take people out to all of the beautiful, unique places here in Lower Alabama and show them the incredible bird life and biodiversity that we have. We also have something called our Audubon Coastal Bird Surveys that take place all throughout the Gulf region here. And we have 16 sites throughout the county that are critical bird areas, whether that's for migration or nesting or feeding habitat. And so we have an awesome group of volunteers that go out and they conduct year-round surveys to do bird presence so that we can collect that data and kind of build the case for conservation. I love this picture because look at that. If you weren't looking for that, it would just look like something blending into the beach. These birds just always surprise me. What can you do to help? If you take one thing from this presentation that you can leave today and you can share with other people, it is to stay out of those nesting areas. If you see those signs, definitely stay out. This right here is a picture of what a flushed colony means. When you say these birds flushed, it means that they flew out. And when you scare a colony of birds like that, not only will adults from the same species attack other eggs and other chicks, you open it up to bigger birds and other predators to come in, and you're also exposing them to really intense heat that could potentially cause fatalities amongst the chicks. So we want to not cause any flushes within our colony, so staying out of those is most important. I have two cute little phrases that I like to tell folks. One of them is fish, swim, and play from 50 yards away. If you see those signs, by giving them a 50-yard buffer, that's gonna help them feel protected enough to tend to their chicks and their nests. We have a lot of people always ask us, well, how close is too close to those birds? And I tell them, if the birds are squawking, keep on walking, which means if the birds are ruffling their feathers or making noises at you, that generally means that you are too close. Have to always say we couldn't do this work alone. We have a large group of partners and funders. Our coastal program is largely funded by the Trustee Implementation Group that is a result of the Deepwater Horizon settlement. And we also supplement that with grants, private donors, and funders as well. This here is a map of all the areas where we have birds nesting here on our coastline. And then this is just a list of some of our partners that we work down here on the coast. As you can see, it is a group effort. We do not hold the rights to any property of where these birds nest, and so it's up to the partners to allow us to come in and do the work that we are doing, and they are incredible partners to have. So with that, if you want to follow along on our journey, we have a Facebook and an Instagram if you're social media people. If not, you can also go sign up for our, it goes out twice monthly e-newsletter, and that just keeps you updated on all the fun stories and happenings that we have going on throughout the state. That is all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you overlap with the turtle people?
Yes, so us and the turtle people are always out at the same time every morning. The difference is that, and kudos to ACF, the Sea Turtle Patrol has so many volunteers and they patrol every single day because you never know when a turtle is going to go up and nest. So they're running their patrols across the coastline every day. Due to staffing, we have 3 full-time staff down here on the coast. We have 2 coastal biologists and myself. And so we monitor our sites once or twice a week, but we do overlap and we see them out there all the time. And it is a fantastic partnership because sometimes we'll come up on a turtle nest before they do. Sometimes they will see the birds that are exhibiting nesting behavior, so we definitely help each other out. Any other questions?
The people who don't allow you onto their property, do they give a reason? Or is it perhaps that they have a fear that's not, that if better education might help them understand that nobody's going to take their property?
I think a lot of the concern does come from, and it's not just people who own that personal property, it's a lot of like beachgoers and anglers and stuff too, that if there is a threatened species on my property or on an area that I enjoy, am I going to lose access to it? Because there are other areas that have like piping plovers where they shut down the whole beach. No go, you can't fish, can't have your dog, you can't be on there, and you will get fined if they find you out there. We don't do that here in the state of Alabama. Different biologists and conservationists will tell you the reasons why that doesn't work, but I think it does cause a lot of animosity. And so for those private property owners, I think there is concern that they might lose access to something that they've worked very hard to have. So that would be my hypothesis. Any other questions?
I'll ask another one.
Yeah.
Does Gilliard Island factor in? Do you all survey that? Or do these kinds of birds is that not their environment?
That is a great question. So to our knowledge, none of the birds that I talked about today nest on Gilliard. I know that there are a lot of pelicans that nest out there, and I know that there's a lot of like long-legged waders, so like our herons and our egrets and stuff like that. And historically, it has been Dr. John Dindo at the Sea Lab who has monitored that. He is retiring and handing that off to us. So it will be something that we will start taking over the monitoring for. But like I said, I don't think it's any of these species, but there are coastal birds that nest out there, and that area is definitely worth protecting.
And that was another question I wanted to ask when you talk about the number of nests. And do you think you might be undercounting, or are you pretty confident that you're finding all the nests that are out there?
That's a fantastic question. There's absolutely a chance that we're undercounting, because like I said, so one of our sites is the entirety of the west end of Dauphin Island, and that is 8 miles of undeveloped beach. Not only will these birds nest on the beach front, they will nest back behind the dunes. And so could we be missing a bird that's just super secretive and really good at hiding? Absolutely. Science is never perfect. I think any scientist will tell you that. But I think that we do have a pretty good grasp on where these birds are nesting because of the time that we have spent kind of searching the coastline. And at the beginning of our nesting season in March and April, we spend a lot more time doing surveys on all of our coastline, because maybe a bird will decide to nest somewhere where it hasn't before. But as the later the nesting season goes, the birds are have pretty high like site fidelity to a certain area, so we can kind of narrow our search. But yeah, absolutely, we could be missing nests.
I want to encourage you. I compliment you on your work, because my dad was an ornithologist.
Oh, nice.
He used to take students down to Dauphin Island, and I remember in the early 70s, you never saw ospreys. And one year we were down there and we saw 60 brown pelicans off the Dauphin Island Bridge. And we stood out there all day with the students and watched them. And I remember saying, as I was a teenager, I said something to one of the students, is that might be the entire brown pelican population of the Gulf Coast.
Absolutely.
And in my lifetime, it's been it just really warms my heart to see how common those birds have become. And I routinely see them on the causeway.
It's like I said, I've been here for like 3.5 years now at this point, and I have heard a lot of stories very similar to that of people who have grown up here. I had a gentleman tell me he has property up in Bay Minette, and I was out there walking his property with him. He's like, I've never seen an eagle out here. Like, do you think that there would be eagles out here? And I kid you not, like an eagle like swooped over, and he just looked and he's like, you did that? And I was like, yes, I did. But I have heard a lot of stories of people talking about like, I've lived here my entire life, and I saw my first eagle ever, like 2 years ago, or the ospreys or the pelicans. And I hope that more people do realize that conservation works. If you give it the chance to, and you give it the time and the patience and the funding, that conservation does work.
So have you found any snipes?
I see snipes pretty regularly down here, actually. So over at Mayer State Park.
Anybody here ever been snipe hunting?
I feel like I'm on a snipe hunt a lot when I'm out there looking for those birds. But we have Wilson snipes at the Mayer State Park boardwalk on the mudflats out there. You can fairly regularly see them out there, or they'll fairly regularly be there. It's finding them that's the problem. And usually I'll have my spotting scope out there just like scanning the mud flats, and I'll be like, what was that? And it's a snipe just staying perfectly still. They're cool birds. All right, folks, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. Like I said, follow us on our website and social media, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterward as well.